let's go ahead and get started with this one. And please ask questions, when we get to a certain point and you're like, I'm not quite sure how we get to this part, just go ahead and stop me so we can, address those as quickly as possible. There's nothing to talk about in the precondition because we do not have any global variables. Now, to determine whether you have global variables or not from pseudocode like this, or from any scripting language like Perl and PHP, what you have to do is to look at the names that are referred to in the subroutine particularly, and then see if all the names are accounted for as local variables or parameters. So when you look at this particular subroutine, and this is really the main part of the subroutine, the names that are referred to include n, but we know what n is. It is a bi-val parameter. There's also x on line 5, but x is also accounted for as a local variable. Factorial itself is the name of the subroutine, so that's also accounted for, and there are no other names involved in this subroutine. So that's why we know that in this particular subroutine, from line 4 to line 9, we do not have any reference to global variables. So that's how you analyze a program to see whether there are any global variables involved or not. In C and C++ programming, the compiler will check and make sure that you are not referring to global variables that are undeclared. But if a global variable is declared, then the compiler cannot say, hey, it's not a good idea to use global variables. It just won't mention anything. Right? Yep.
But by value is a way to access something that's outside the subroutine, correct?
By reference is. By reference means the parameter is an alias of a column that does not belong to the invocation itself. So it can be either a global variable or something that belongs to a prior but still active invocation of either the same subroutine or some other subroutine. But this is by val, which means it is kind of like a local variable, except the initial value is specified by the invoke statement.
All right.
Okay. All right. So now we start on line 14 because that's the only line outside of the definition of a subroutine. And because main itself does not return a value, we can just go ahead and use return line number. It simplifies things a little bit, because we just have to remember we are returning to post, and that's it. We do have to allocate any additional columns that main may need, but in this case you can see that main has no local variables whatsoever, no parameters, so that's why we don't have to use any additional columns other than column C to remember where are we supposed to go back to when main is done. Now we can continue execution in main, which only has one real line of statement, which is line 12. Line 12 has two operations combined onto the same line. The first operation we have to do is to finish the invocation of factorial first. That will give us a number. Okay, it will give us an integer, and that integer is what we're going to print. But we cannot do the printing part until we are done with invoking factorial, so that's the first thing we'll do. Now this is the part when it starts to get a little bit involved, because when you invoke factorial, let me just change the screens first so that we can see both the algorithm and the trace at the same time. When we invoke factorial, we have to use return info instead of return line number. The main reason why I changed the terminology and also the way I represent where we are returning to is because we are returning back to line 12. The invocation is on line 12, but we have to go back to line 12 to finish some unfinished business on line 12. And that's why I'm using return info to keep track of what else am I supposed to do once the subroutine is done. Okay? So the understanding the rationale behind return info as opposed to return line number is important. So what we need to do is to remember when we are done with this invocation of factorial, we have to go back to line 12. So 12 colon is important because we're going back to line 12. But what is also important in this case is what else am I supposed to do on that line? The printing part is not done yet. But what it is going to print is going to be filled in by the invocation. And that's why the invocation itself, invoke factorial 3 goes to n, is replaced by a single question mark. Are there any questions about this part all by itself? Any questions about the rationale or the mechanism itself? No questions? This is all good? All right. Well, we'll have other opportunities to look at this same mechanism later on. Now, since we're dealing with an invocation, we also have to allocate additional columns if they're needed. In this case, we do need one additional column for n because it is a by-value parameter. In this case, it is also specified by the invoke statement to be just 3. So n starts with a value of 3. And then we have one more thing. We have a local variable x, which is a variable local to factorial. It starts with an unknown value. All local variables start with an unknown value. So now we have set up the 3 columns that we need for this particular invocation of factorial. Are there any questions? In this class, we allocate local variables and parameters at the same time. Okay? Now that we have everything allocated, we can start execution inside the subroutine, starting on line 4. Line 4 is a conditional statement, or the beginning of a conditional statement. It checks the condition of n is greater than 1. N refers to column E. It has a value of 3. 3 is greater than 1 is true. So we move on to line 5 in this case. Line 5 is also a one line of operation that actually has several things to do. The first thing you have to do on line 5 is to finish the invocation of factorial. Once you have a number, then you can use that number to update local variable x. So there are 2 things to do, but we cannot do the assignment until we are done with the invocation of factorial. And that's why when you execute line 5 the first time, you have to deal with the invocation first. So once again, we have to use return info. This time we are getting back to line 5. So that's why the 5: is important in return info. What else is on this line to finish? Well, we have the assignment to x to finish the entire operation. And then the invocation itself is replaced by a single question mark. It's a placeholder. Basically, it's just saying that this will be filled in by the subroutine call itself. Are we still doing okay so far? Yep, go ahead.
Real quick, to move the line, the margin over so you can have 2 scroll bars, that was on the right-hand side?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can do that again. So before it looks like this. So you see this little kind of dark bar here?
Right.
That's what you drag.
Okay.
So you hover your pointer over that, it should turn into a double-sided arrow, and then you can just drag it over. Then you can divide your screen into 2 halves, and then each side has its own horizontal scroll bar.
Yeah, I was trying to do that.
You may not need to do that when you're doing your homework assignment because you typically have a larger screen with a higher resolution, so you should still be okay unless you're using a bigger font.
Then I realized I just needed to increase my column.
Yeah. You can also control the zoom ratio. That
For some reason, mine was like this.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to the next column, we have to allocate for the parameters as well as local variables. Just like last time, we have we have by-value parameter n and local variable x. Local variable x has an unknown value to begin with, and parameter n in this case, if you look at the algorithm, it is specified by n minus 1. Now the n minus 1 is actually referring to n of column E because that's the n that we already know. 3 minus 1 is 2. That 2 is used to specify the new parameter n. So column H ends up with a value of 2. Are there any questions at this point about how I set up columns G, H, and I? Nope. Okay. So going forward, is as I said, in the previous class, going forward is actually easier than going backwards. Okay. So after this, we continue execution from the beginning of the subroutine that we're invoking, which is factorial, starting on line 4. N is greater than 1 is once again true because 2 is greater than 1. We go to line 5 again, and then we have to go through pretty much the same motion, except this time n minus 1 is using this n, which is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. So that's why when we invoke it one more time, this n starts with a value of 1 instead of 2. So now I can shrink columns. Just like that. Once we set up the columns, we continue execution in the subroutine starting on line 4 again. When n is greater than 1 is false now, because n, which is column k, has a value of just 1. 1 is greater than 1 is false. And this stops the recursion, because this time we have to go to the else branch, which is on line 8. Line 8 does not invoke factorial anymore. It simply returns a value of 1. This is also a critical moment, in terms of understanding the mechanism of invoking and returning, because at this point I'm executing return 1 on line 8. The return statement is only going to change the question mark of the return info cell to a particular value, and that's it. It does not actually do the assignment itself. Okay, that part is very important. So what we're doing here on line 8, which is returning a value of 1, is to locate the return info column that is the rightmost active one, which is this one. We just copy and paste it, and then change the question mark to the value that we're returning, which is 1. But we are not executing line 5 at this point. This is not the right time to execute line 5. We're just filling in the blank so we can execute that statement later. After line 8, we go to line 10, because that's the end of the entire subroutine. That part is not very exciting, because we just have to remember that we have to go back onto line 5, and line 5 really looks like this at this point. I'm going to make a copy of this over here, just so that it is easier for us to tell what do we have to do on line 5 when we get back onto line 5. If you just put a 5 here, that's fine, as long as the effect is what this cell is specifying. So when you do this homework assignment, you can choose between this approach and just putting line 5 in column B. Is that okay? Yep, go ahead.
So we just leave the column L, I suppose, for X just blank.
That is correct.
Okay, that's what I did, but I wasn't sure because it seemed kind of.
It's okay,
excess
occasionally to
information.
have one local variable not being used at all.
Okay.
Yep.
Can I get 1 goes to X as a comment, or?
Not yet. Not yet. Okay, are you talking about row 14 of the trace? This row here?
No, I'm doing row 16.
Row 16?
Yeah, can I use what I have in row?
Oh, you mean put it in here in comments?
Yes.
Yeah, you can. I mean, as long as the effect is clear that you're updating the value of X, then it's fine. Yep. But we do have one more thing to do on line 10, because we have to clean up the 3 columns that were allocated earlier. So the way to do it is just to copy and paste it, and then I just used strike out. You can use some other way to indicate the same thing. Okay, so now these 3 columns are deallocated. Now I continue execution on line 5. This is the time to execute line 5, okay? Because when we get back onto line 5, we look at this and go, can we perform the assignment statement now? And the answer is yes, okay? There are no more invocations necessary. So now we can say, oh, I want to copy a value of 1 to variable X. It is at this point that column I, which is local variable X, that is updated to a value of 1. Are there any questions about this part? Because this really is the important part of this homework assignment. Going forward is a little bit easy in a way, but going backward is, okay, but when do we update a variable X? This is the time to update it. The return statement is simply specifying the question mark, which is the placeholder, but we do not perform the actual operation until here.
I was just going to go back to starting at line 8. Just kind of.
Back to line 8?
Yeah.
Okay. You mean row 8 of the trace?
Yeah.
You mean here?
Oh, no. Row 14.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so rolling back in time, this is basically executing line 8 here. When you execute line 8, which is just return 1, when you execute the return statement, all that you're doing is to replace the question mark of the return info cell, the currently active return info cell, with the value that you're returning. Yep.
So the furthest right return info, the only way it can be updated is if there's a return statement that updates it, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so it's like, for instance, in this case, return, or line 8 can only update column J.
Right, that is correct. Because column J, K, and L together is the context of this particular invocation. Yep.
And you'll need a return info if you're using a by reference parameter as well.
A by reference parameter has nothing to do with return info or not, because a by reference parameter is an alias of some other columns.
Okay, so the only time you're using return info is if you have a return in the statement.
When you have a return statement, correct. So when a subroutine has a return statement, then when you're invoking that particular subroutine, then you have to use return info so you can keep track of what else you have to do on the line after you come back to that line. Okay, any other questions? No questions? Okay, because I think this is really the most tricky part of this assignment is starting here, is when do we actually update X? Okay, because it's broken up into two parts. The first part is on row 14, which is what we are at right now. Okay, it's just filling in the question mark so that we know, oh, the question mark is really a value of 1, but we are not doing anything about it yet. We're only going to do something about it when we get to row 16 of the trace, when we get back onto line 5 from the invocation of the subroutine. Are we doing okay with this part? Okay. Okay. Now that we are on, we are now done with row 16 because our line 5 is now done. After line 5, we have to execute line 6. Line 6 is a return statement. It is returning n times x. N in this case has a value of 2. X in this case has a value of 1. 2 times 1 is 2. So this statement on line 6 is effectively returning a value of 2. When you return a value of 2, you go through the same motion as last time. You locate the currently active return info cell, which is our column G. Just copy and paste it. Change the question mark to the value that we are returning. In this case, what value are we returning? It's returning a value of 2. Okay? And you don't want to write down 2 times 1, okay? Because you really want to just evaluate 2 times 1 to a single value of 2 and then specify that in place of the question mark. But we are not performing this assignment statement at this point because we're executing line 6, we're not executing line 5. After line 6, we get out of the conditional statement, so we end up on line 10, the end of the entire subroutine. So we have to go do the two things again, look up the return info cell. It looks like this now. So when we get back onto line 5, this is what is left on line 5 to perform, but I'm not going to do it now. I'm just remembering where am I supposed to go back to and what else I have to do when I get back there. And then after this, I have no use of these 3 columns anymore, and then I just mark these as deallocated. Are we still doing okay so far? Okay. Now that we are back onto line 19, let me just kind of roll these columns a little bit so we can see what is X at this point. This X refers to column F. And now I'm ready to execute the assignment statement. So we are updating the value of X with the value of 2. So X is now updated to 2. And then we can move on to line 6. Line 6 says return n times x. N has a value of 3. X has a value of 2. 3 times 2 is 6. So we are returning a value of 6. When you return a particular value, you look up the return info cell, you copy and paste it, change the question mark to the value that we are actually returning. In this case, it is 6, and you're done. So all that you have to do with a return statement, when you execute a return statement, is to replace the question mark with something else. And then do nothing, do not do anything beyond that point. Okay, so this is not the right time to print the value of 6. We're just specifying the question mark. After line 6, once again, we get to line 10. There's 2 things to do. One is to look at the return info cell. We have to go back onto line 12, and this is the rest of what line 12 should do, but I'm not doing it at this point. The second thing we have to do on line 10 is to deallocate the 3 columns that we have allocated for this invocation. You just have to mark it as deallocated. And now we can continue execution on line 12. Line 12 says, the only thing remaining to do is to print the value of 6. There are no more invocations to do, so print 6 is all that we are going to do. After line 12, we get to line 13. Line 13 is the end of the main subroutine. And I have to scroll up a little bit here. It has a return line number of post. So there are two things to do on line 13, which is the end of the main subroutine. First part is to look up the return line number and just remind ourselves that we have to continue execution at post. And then the second thing it has to do is to deallocate the column that was allocated for this invocation. And now we continue execute. Oops, moved it down here. And now we continue execution at post, which means we are done. Are there any questions about this trace? Yep.
I don't know, because what I did, it seems like when I was returning from like columns G and right around there, I didn't go from 5 to 6. I think I just went from like 5 to 10, and at the end, what I think I got confused was because at the very last, we're calling D right before I printed. I think I went to like, I think that's where I put my line 6 in. Yeah. I think I kind of like just kept returning and not. Well, I still got the same answer. I got 6, but it was, I don't know.
So you're combining line 6 with line 10, basically.
Yeah, at the end.
Okay.
Because I understand now like what I did wrong. Because I should have, when I went back to 5, I should have went to 6, then to 10. But I was just doing 5, and then
to 10.
There was an imaginary return apparently.
Well, but that really brings up a good point. Line 6 in pseudocode does not actually go back to the previous invocation. Right. All it does is to specify the question mark and replace it with an actual value. And then line 10 is the one that actually goes back to the previous invocation. In C and C++, a return statement actually combines the effect of what we understand as a return statement in this class and also the end of a subroutine. So that really is kind of, what you did is consistent with the C and C++ language, but in this class I break it up into 2 parts. Okay. This is more consistent with Visual Basic, because in Visual Basic that's how it does things. Is you can use one statement to specify the return value, and then it won't do anything until it actually hits the end of the subroutine to go back to the previous invocation.
We should get another one of these.
Sorry?
We should have another one of these.
Yep, we will. Because I realize most people do not get this part. It's line 5 and then line 6, and then we execute line. Excuse me, I take it back. We execute line 6, line 10 of one invocation. Then we get back to the previous invocation to continue with line 5. That really is the most important part of this assignment. So if I were to highlight the most important part or the trickiest part of this assignment, I would say it would be these 3 rows in a row. Because line 8 is only going to change the question mark. Line 10 actually does the return or pass control back to the previous invocation. And then row 16 is the execution of the statement that was specified by the return statement. Okay. Yep, go ahead.
We didn't have a precondition for this, so if we forgot to put the pre.
That's fine. I'm not going to take any points off. It's not the main point of this homework assignment. It really is this part. Any other questions? No other questions? Right. Let me make sure we save this one into today's folder. And then what we'll do is we'll go through some of the practice exam for the second exam, because our second exam is next Tuesday. Right. And I have a feeling that we'll be seeing this again in the practice exam. Okay, so we have a few, actual exam in. This is the actual exam of fall 2012. So let's take a look at these first. And it's all in the zip file.
I have a question.
question for you, Ken.
Yep, go ahead.
From the Moodle site, whenever you try to download something to like a tablet, the download doesn't work.
The download does not work?
Right. Like if you, like for instance on my tablet, if I click one of your links that for download, then what it'll just basically when it tries to contact the server for the file, it just stops and pauses. It doesn't actually download the file. Do you know why that?
Do you know whether it actually downloaded the file or not, or just not, or just it doesn't know what to do with it?
Well, it doesn't know what to do with the link. So
Okay. Because if it's downloading a zip file, not every tablet knows what to do with a zip file.
well, that's even like with the homework assignments. It doesn't work.
Okay. Well, with the homework assignment, it's downloading an ODS file.
Right.
And an ODS file, I think a tablet doesn't know what to do with it either.
I have well, you can from the Play Store you can get
Like
programs that will
LibreOffice?
Yeah, well, not LibreOffice, but you can get programs that will open it,
Okay.
and it just doesn't. It just stops.
All right. So this is the first of the questions, and we'll take a look. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is to look at the algorithm itself, and try to figure out what the algorithm is trying to specify. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. That's better. Okay. The algorithm itself, what do you think? Just by looking at it, can you tell what it's trying to do? Well, it's trying to count, the relationship between neighboring elements in the array, because you can see what it's comparing. The comparison is based on a bracket I versus a bracket I plus 1. If it's less than, greater than, or equal to. So x is basically counting the number of times when an element is less than the element next to it. Y is counting the times when an element is greater than the element that is next to it, and z is counting when they are equal. Okay? They're all initialized to 0 to begin with, and we have the entire array, defined here. So we can just go ahead and do it, quote unquote, in this spreadsheet. By the way, this application called Xournal, Xournal, is really helpful because it lets you open up a PDF file and then be able to make changes to it and then save it, as a Xournal file. So it's great for filling in forms, or if you have instructions or any type of manual or book distributed in PDF. This is a great way to mark it up and add your own annotations. Save it. You can use text. You can use just type text here, and just like that. Or you can just use the pointer tool and stuff like that too. The only part that is kind of not so good about it is once you have text in it, you can undo it, but you cannot just erase or change the text later on. All right, so let's go
Can
ahead.
it save as PDF?
You said it can save as Xournal file. Can it save as PDF?
Well, let's check. You can save it as a Xournal file, but to turn it into PDF, you can just print and export it PDF. So it is possible to save the whole thing back into a PDF format, but it's more flexible if you save it as a Xournal file. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. And I want to see if I can change the text tool and change the font. So we'll pick a smaller font here, just so that it will fit in these slots. Okay, this is the precondition. We have. Okay, use your 7-digit student ID to fill in columns for A bracket 0 to A bracket 6. So I'll just kind of imagine, one that is not real. Okay, so 2, 7, 6, 1, 2, 1, 1. Okay, all right. And then we can start execution from line 1. Line 1 says it wants to initialize I to 0. So I gets a value of 0 at this point. Then we move on to line 2. Line 2 wants to initialize x to 0, so we put a 0 here. Line 3. Oh, it does let me go back and change the text earlier. It's helpful. So y gets a value of 0. And then on line 4, we are changing z to 0. So z now gets a value of 0. Are we still doing okay so far? Okay. Yep.
Is that snapping to the field or is it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't really understand snapping at all. So I have to manually control the actual placement of text. So let's move on to line 5. Line 5 is the beginning of a loop, and it wants to evaluate the condition of I is less than bar a bar minus 1. Bar a bar in this case is 7. There are 7 elements in array A. So 7 minus 1 is 6. I is 0. 0 is less than 6 is true. Then we move on to line 6 because we are getting into the loop itself. Line 6 is the beginning of a conditional statement. So we have another another condition to evaluate. A bracket I is less than a bracket I plus 1. Okay, let's find out whether that's true or not. I has a value of 0. So we are actually comparing a bracket 0 against a bracket 1. A bracket 0 has a value of 2. A bracket 1 has a value of 7. 2 is less than 7 is true. And that's why we are moving on to the next line. The next line is line 7. Line 7 is bumping up the value of x by 1. And then we get out of the entire multi-branch conditional statement. Because from line 6 to line 12 is one single conditional statement. It just has multiple branches. After you take one branch, you have to get out of the entire conditional statement. So after line 7, we jump all the way to the end of the loop, or excuse me, we jump all the way to line 13 because there's one statement to execute at the end of the conditional statement. Line 13 is adding 2 to I. In other words, I'm skipping by 1. So I goes from 0 to 2. After line 13 is the end of the entire loop. We have to go back up to the beginning, which is on line 5. On line 5, we have to reevaluate the condition. I is less than bar a bar minus 1. It's still true because bar a bar minus 1 is 6. And I has a value of 2. 2 is less than 6 is true. And then we go back into the body of the loop on line 6. Line 6 is re-evaluating a bracket I is less than a bracket I plus 1. This time I is 2, so we are comparing a bracket 2 against a bracket 3. A bracket 2 has a value of 6, a bracket 3 has a value of 1. 6 is less than 1 is false. Because this branch is not true, we have to go to the alternative branch on line 8. So the next line to execute is on line 8. And then what line 8 has to evaluate is the other condition. A bracket I is greater than a bracket I plus 1 is true, because 6 is greater than 1 is true. Then we have to execute line 9. Line 9 is adding 1 to y. Y goes from 0 to 1. Then we exit the entire conditional statement. We end up on line 13 again. I gets bumped up by 2. So 2 plus 2 is 4. I ends up with a value of 4. And then we go back to the beginning of the loop, which is line 5 again. That condition is still true because I has a value of 4. Bar a bar minus 1 is 6. 4 is less than 6 is true. Are there any questions at this point? Other than the annoying part that I cannot put the cursor where I want it. Because it wants to snap to the previous one. Okay, so we get on to line 6. Line 6 is evaluating the same condition, but I has changed, so the result can be changed too. A bracket I is less than A bracket I plus 1 is I now has a value of 4, so we're comparing A bracket 4, which is 2, against A bracket 5, which has a value of 1. 2 is less than 1 is false. So once again, this is false. We move on to line 8 for the second condition of the multi-branch conditional statement. Second condition is checking A bracket I is greater than A bracket I plus 1, and that is true. So we move on to line 9. It adds 1 to y. Y goes from 1 to 2. And then we exit the conditional statement. We end up on line 13. We add 2 to I. So it goes from 4 to 6. Then we get back onto line 5. Line 5 is asking I is less than bar A bar minus 1. I is 6, bar A bar minus 1 is 6 as well. So this is now false, because 6 is less than 6 is false. So after this, we get out of the loop, end up at post, and we're done. I'm sorry the text doesn't line up exactly on the lines. I tried my best. Any questions about this phrase? No questions? So you guys still remembering your loops, your basic loop, your conditional statements, array indexing? Okay. Right, so do you guys want me to export it to PDF, or do you want me to save it as a Zerno file?
PDF.
PDF?
More people have the ability to read it.
You can get Zerno for Windows too. Yep.
It's the only thing that it can open up that extension though, right?
Yeah, I think so. So this is X2, Q1. I'll export it one, and then I'll save it as a Zerno file too. So for people who want to kind of play with it, you can do it. Just as a different extension, that's all. And I want to try one thing. I just want to see if I can go back and change. Yep, I can go back and change the text. So that's really nice.
It's probably lightweight too, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
It's open source, right?
Is open source. Yep. Now let's see if I can move it. Use the hand tool. Yep, that's just for scrolling. Where's my little... I want to see if I can just move it. Yep. That's nice. So I can't move things around just by selecting it. Oh, there you go. There we go. So I can line up things and spend all day long doing it. But it's really handy because it also allows you to draw lines, free form type of text. Drawing. You can just select a pencil and just you can just kind of scribble on it. But you can do it to any type of PDF file, and I think that's a nice thing to do, especially for people who want to fill in forms and the only thing they do is a read-only PDF file. This will let you, do your own addition on the form and fill it in, print it out.
You can text anywhere on it too.
Hmm?
You could add some text notes or something to it.
Exactly. Yep. If you have a textbook that is available as a PDF, this will let you do the highlighting. Just go select the highlighting pen, and then you can just highlight it. So that's handy.
You can do that with PDFs in Adobe as well.
Yeah, but this doesn't cost you any money.
Adobe doesn't cost you any money.
You mean Acrobat Reader?
Yeah.
Reader version can do it?
Yeah. If you digitally sign the document, you can edit it. So if you're filling out a form, you usually have to sign it anyway, so you can actually digitally sign the document and put text on it.
But this you can do to any document.
This is true.
All right, so that's the first one. Any questions about this one? Any questions? All right, so we'll move on to the second question. So Q1A, Q2. Some of these have multiple versions and some only have one version, depending on the nature of the question. All right, so let's take a look at this one. that's the code is up here, and then we want to trace it down here. Well, just by looking at the code, what do you think? I guess a value of 0 to begin with, and we are adding we're adding a value to I in the parentheses, and then we mod it with bar a bar, and then store the entire thing back to I. So the question is, one, will we ever be getting indexing out of range? Because when I goes out of the range of 0 to 4, then we have a problem because we don't have any element other than a bracket 0 to a bracket 4. So that's the first question. The second question is, this is a repeat until loop. We're exiting when I becomes 0. So the question is, do you think I will get back to 0? Okay. All right. So we'll test it. Okay. It's not obvious, at this point, whether it will exit or not, because it seems like, well, we don't know. Maybe it will exit and maybe it won't. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with this. And I don't think you remember my last text font, so we'll go back and change it. All right. So we start execution on line 1 again. I gets initialized to 0. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where's the best part to click in order to. Okay, I think I know what it's doing. It's the middle of the I that is the upper left corner of the text box. Okay, so now that I know that, next one will be easier. Except it wants to
hit enter and make it go down in a new row from the.
Yeah, but then it has to line up too. I have to pick the right font to make it line up.
It looks like it lines up pretty well.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep doing this until it's out of alignment. Then we'll do something else. Okay. So then we move in, but we don't trace line 2 because this is a repeat until loop. The word repeat has no meaning other than, hey, this is the first part of the loop. Okay, this is the beginning. But other than that, it doesn't do anything. So we will trace line 3 instead here. All right. So this is really the important part. Is what is line 3 going to do? Well, using this, I can just use somewhere else of the. Well, let's put it next to here. Just put it next to here. Right here. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is to say, okay, what is I plus a bracket I? Well, I at this point has a value of 0. So 0 plus a bracket I has a value of 57, because a bracket 0 has a value of 57. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So this is just 0 plus 57, which is 57. Next, we want to figure out, but what is this whole thing mod bar a bar? Well, what do you think is bar a bar? Bar a bar is 5 because we have 5 elements in the array. 57 mod 5 is
11.
It's the remainder of 57 divided by 5. It has a remainder of 2. Very good. So that means the entire right-hand side of this assignment statement is really just 2. And that's why we are going back here and we update I with a value of 2. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So after this, we go to line 4. Line 4 has to evaluate the condition I is 0. So we say I equals to 0 is false because it is clearly not 0. A has a value of 2. Then we get back onto line 3. Whoops. How come this time it doesn't do it? Okay, there we go. So we get back onto line 3, and this time line 3 has to kind of go through the same thing. What do you think I should be updated to at this point? 2. Not 2. Because it's 2 plus 7 mod 5, which is 4. Okay. 4 mod 5 is, 9 mod 5 is 4, so I gets updated to a value of 4. Are we doing okay so far with this? Why it has a value of 4 this time? Then we get back onto line 4. Line 4 is saying, oh, it's the same condition, I equals to 0 is false. because I has a value of 4 at this point. Okay. After line 4, we continue execution on line 3 because this is a repeat until loop. This time it is 4 plus 17, which is 21. 21 mod 5 is 1. So we update I with a value of 1 this time. Then we get back onto line 4 again. Line 4 says, nope, that condition is still false. So at this point, some people may wonder, will this ever become an infinite loop? It's too early to make that conclusion. Now, it's too early to make that conclusion because have you seen I repeating itself? No. Now, as long as I has not repeated itself, we don't know whether it will continue to be an infinite loop because it can still continue to change, and until you get back, if you keep saying 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, in fact, if you see the column of I saying 2, 4, 1, and then back to 2, you can stop right away and say, okay, this is going to be an infinite loop because we're recreating the exact same condition as an earlier row, which means there's no way to get out of the loop. But so far, we have not seen exactly the same condition, so we have to keep going. So after line 4, we get back to line 3, because this is a loop. Line 3 this time is saying, what is 1 plus 47? 1 plus 47 is 48. 48 mod 5 is 3. Okay. Are you guys starting to see a pattern here? How many people have changed your own tire with 5 lugs?
It's doing basically alternating. It's doing every even number, every even index first, and then every odd index.
There's a graphical way of looking at it.
Right.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. We start with the 0, right? 0, 2, 4, 1, 3. Okay. Did I say tire rotation and the order of tightening your lugs, the lug nuts? That's exactly what it is. Okay.
When you have a 6-bolt pattern, that throws it all to hell.
Sorry?
Except when you have a 6-bolt pattern or a 4-bolt pattern, that throws it all to hell.
Yeah, 4-bolt pattern. You have to do the cross thing. Yep. All right. So we are now back to line 4 again. Line 4. Let me see if I can just. Can I copy, paste? Yes. Nice. Okay.
Where's the last one?
Hmm?
You gotta select your text
I
again.
have to go back to the text tool. All right, back to line 3. All right, so back to line 3, we have to figure out what is 3 plus 37? 40. 40 mod 5 is
0.
0. All right, back to 0. So now we move on to line 4. And, well, I got two possibilities here. Copy and paste and then modify. Oh, wrong tool. Text tool. Okay. This is finally true. And then we get to line, get to post. You're all done. Yep.
We're gonna have 2 questions.
Yep,
If it
go
was
ahead.
infinite, how would you represent it instead of going on and on and on?
If it is on and on and on, you just basically, in the description of the test, I usually have one clause that says, if you think this is an infinite loop, just stop where you think it is starting to see the infinite pattern, and just briefly explain why you think it's an infinite loop.
So if we did have an infinite loop, for example, and instead of just stopping if it went 2, 4, 1 and stopping at 2, and we just represented 2, 4, 1 again, that wouldn't matter. It wouldn't count against us, would it? And say this is why it's an infinite loop.
If it's an infinite loop, you have to wait until you get back to the same condition as an earlier row.
Right.
Then you can say, since we are reproducing exactly the same condition and nothing else is changed, so we know that it's going to be an infinite loop because it will just keep repeating this pattern from this row to this row. Okay, so we just finished this star pattern like that. This will work as long as what do you think if I change all the 7s to 8s? So 58, 48, 8, 38, and 18.
Checks the odds.
It works the same way, exactly, because it will go from 0 to 3, and then it will just reverse the pattern. Yep.
So we can say it did repeat, but we got out of the loop before it repeated something else, right?
You mean
still,
from-
it still would repeat.
You mean how it ended?
Yeah.
You mean over here? Well, it has to go from for to post because according to this, we evaluate the condition after the body of the loop.
We did get to 0 though, that's what we wanted.
We got back to 0 because I got back to 0 in the 5th iteration of the loop. So when we tested whether I is 0, it is a 0 when we get back onto line 4. And when the condition of a repeat until loop is true, the exit condition is true, and therefore we are getting out of the loop.
But it does have a recurrence ratio, it does have a ratio where it's repeating, like it's over here.
Correct. Well, that has to do with 5 is a prime number and 2 basically is a prime number too. So that's why you can always get back to whatever number you start with. Yep.
So, will this only work with 7 and 8?
It will work with 7, 8. It works with 9 too, and it will also work with 1. Because what you're doing is, okay, let's say we have ones. Okay, so instead of 57, it is 51, and all the least significant digits are 1. Okay, because the most significant digit for the most part is useless, because 50 itself is divisible by 5, so it doesn't change the remainder at all. So if it is 1, then you're going with this pattern. If it is 4, then you're going in the same. You'll be in the same shape, but with backwards, because 0 plus 4 mod 5 is 4, and then you'll just be going backwards like that. The only time it doesn't work, or this becomes a trivial loop, is when you have 55, 45, 5, 35, and 15, because in that case, the mod or the remainder is always 0. So you finish one loop, one iteration, and then the condition is true, and then you get out. Okay. Any other questions about this one? No questions? All right. So let me save it. Once again, I'll export it as PDF first, and then we'll save it too. X2 Q2 for question number 2, and we'll also save the Zerno file. And before I go any further, what I'll do is I will go to the Zerno website, just so that you know how to get to it. It's just zerno.sourceforge.org, and then you go to download. Where is it?
Looks like the Windows binaries are experimental. It's right there.
Oh, okay. I have used it without any problems. But you have the PDF too, so it's up to you guys. Right. So that's question number 2. The other ones are really just variants, just like what I did earlier. Changing the last digit to 3, 4, 1. So they should all work out. And now we are back to number 3. Okay, so the same thing. Like. All right. So the first thing we want to do is also take a look at the loop, at the pseudocode first. And then we'll look at the algorithm and then try to figure out what it's going to do. When you look at the pseudocode, we have a double loop in this case. We have a loop inside another loop. The outer loop is going to stay there as long as n is greater than 1. And then the inner loop is going to calculate, well, the condition is n mod a bracket 0 is 0. As long as that is true, we stay in the inner loop. And then you see that n gets its new value based on the division of n by something else. It starts with 45. So let's go ahead and figure out what this is going to do. I think we have seen something like this before. Whenever we deal with a mod, we're looking at the remainder of something, and this is saying as long as the remainder is 0, do the following, and it's incrementing k inside the inner loop. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this one. We'll change the zoom a little bit just so that I can see all the other columns. Zoom out. And we have to change the font size again.
Why isn't it saving your preferences? Why isn't it saving your preferences?
Because I never asked you to save it. Does it even have an option to save? Yep, save preferences. Auto save. There we go. Why is it not saving? Because I didn't ask it to. All right. So let's start with line 1. Okay, here we go. Line 1, it wants to initialize k to 0. So k gets a value of 0. And line 2 wants to initialize I to 0 as well. And then we have line 3, which is the beginning of a loop. N has a value of 45 at this point. 45 is greater than 1 is true. So now we go into the inner loop starting on line 4. Line 4 has a condition to evaluate as well. N mod a bracket I equals to 0 is, well, let's see. And I has a value of 0 at this point. N has a value of 45. A bracket 0 has a value of 2. 45 mod 2 is, what is the remainder of 45 divided by 2? It's a remainder of non-zero. That's all that we care, right? Whether it's equal, whether it equals to 0 or not, it does not equal to 0. So this condition is false. False, and where do we go next? Okay, this has to do with, this is a nested loop. So when the inner loop from line 4 to line 8 has a condition that is false, then we skip the entire inner loop to line 9. So don't forget line 9 because we do have one little thing to do after the inner loop, which is just adding 1 to I. I now goes from 0 to 1. And then we are going back to the very beginning of the outer loop, which is on line 3. Line 3 is asking the question of, is n greater than 1? Is n has a value of 45, 45 is greater than 1 is true. After line 3, we go to line 4. And then line 4 has to evaluate the condition of n mod a bracket I equals to 0. I has a value of 1. A bracket 1 has a value of 3. 45 mod 3 is 0, because 45 divided by 0 is 15 with a remainder of 0. So the condition is true. Then we have to go into the inner loop. After line 4, we get to line 5. Line 5 is going to copy the value of a bracket I, which has a value of 3, to b bracket k. K is 0, so b bracket k is this column here, and then we'll get updated with a value of 3. Are we still doing okay so far with this trace? Okay. It's trying to use array B to remember the components, the prime components of 45. That's basically what it's doing. After line 5, we get on to line 6. Line 6 is just adding 1 to k so that we have the next location to store the next prime factor. So k goes from 0 to 1. And then we go to line 7. Line 7 is calculating the quotient of n divided by a bracket I. N is 45 at this point. A bracket I is a bracket 1, which has a value of 3. So 45 divided by 3 has a value of 15. So n is now updated to a value of 15. That's the end of the inner loop. We have to go back to the beginning of the inner loop, which is on line 4. Are there any questions about why we are moving from line 7 back to line 4? It's because it's a loop. At the end of the loop, we have to go back to reevaluate the condition to see whether we should stay in the loop or not. What do you think? 15 is n at this point. We are still using the same a bracket I, which is a bracket 1, which has a value of 3. 15 mod 3 is 0 again. Okay, so we can just be a little bit lazy because we can say that this condition is still true. So we just go ahead and copy the entire thing, which means the next line to execute is still line 5. Line 5 is going to copy 3 to b bracket 1. So b bracket 1 is going to be updated to a value of 3 again. Then we move on to line 6. K gets incremented by 1. It goes from 1 to 2. And then we move on to line 7. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So n itself is updated from 15 to 5. Then we move back to the beginning of the inner loop, which is on line 4. That condition is no longer true because n is 5, a bracket I is 3, 5 mod 3 is not 0. So we get out of line 4, we get out of the inner loop, we continue execution on line 9 in this case. And line 9 is going to add 1 to I goes from 1 to 2. And then we go back to the beginning of the outer loop, which is on line 3. Line 3 is asking, is n greater than 1? N is greater than 1 is still true, because n has a value of 5 at this point. I should learn how to use the shortcut keys. After line 3, we get to line 4. Line 4 is n is 5. A bracket I also has a value of 5. 5 mod 5 has a value of 0. So that result is true. Just copy and paste. And after line 4, we get to line 5. Line 5 is going to copy a bracket I to b bracket k. A bracket I is a bracket 2. It has a value of 5. B bracket k is b bracket 2. So this column is now updated to a value of 5. And then we continue execution on line 6, which is just adding 1 to k. K is this column. It had a value of 2, so now it has a value of 3. After line 6, we move on to line 7. Line 7 is 5 divided by 5 because n has a value of 5 at this point. A bracket I is a bracket 2, which also has a value of 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. N is now updated to a value of 1. This is the end of line 7. And after line 7, we have to go back to the beginning of the inner loop on line 4. That condition is now finally false, because n is 1, mod a bracket I, which is 5, 1 mod 5 is 1, which is not 0. Out of the inner loop, we continue execution on line 9. We add 1 to I goes from 2 to 3. And then we get back to line 3. Line 3 is asking n is greater than 1. That is false at this point. Because n is 1, 1 is greater than 1 is false. Then we don't have anything else to do in the outer loop. We just get to post, and that's the end of the trace. Phew, that was boring. Are there any questions about this? No? Okay, so it's really just, tracking it down, step by step, line by line, to figure out, what it's gonna do. When I grade something like this, if someone makes a mistake, I will try to spot out, what the mistake is. Is it a conceptual thing, or is it just a silly mistake? If it's a conceptual mistake, then the points will be taken off in a kind of more major way. But if it's a silly mistake, like the mod of an operation is incorrect or something like that, then minor points will be taken off as long as the rest of the algorithm is consistent. Are we still doing okay so far with this? Okay. So this is done. We'll go ahead and export it. This is exam 2, question 3. Also save the file to the same location.
You're uploading these so we can see them, right?
Hmm?
You will be uploading these so we can see them.
Yeah, I can do that. In fact, I can zip it up and upload it at the end of this class. So can someone remind me to do it? All right, so that's number 3. This is question number 4. All right, this is question number 4. Let's take a look at the code first. It does have 2 arrays, and one is initialized, and it looks kind of like the previous one where we have 2 arrays, array A and array B. Array B is the one that is getting updated, and array A is the one that is being read. I'm just going through array A. What do you think question number 4 is going to do? Well, let's go through the pseudocode line by line, but without actually tracing it. I start with a value of 0. Okay, that's a fairly typical thing. We start from the beginning of an array. You can see that I is used in both arrays. So I is used as an index to array B as well as array A. While n equals to 0 and I is less than bar B bar, do the following. Well, right away, what do you think?
It won't do anything.
It won't do anything, exactly. So in that test, in fall 2012, this was the easy question. But yet some people still missed it.
But you just put,
Huh?
you initialize I and then you post, right?
Yep, exactly. So you still have to execute it line by line. So you still start
Yeah.
with line 1.
That's what I do. I put the iron.
So you still would start with line 1. I gets a value of 0. And then you move on to line 2. Line 2 has to evaluate the condition. Now, since we're using short-circuited evaluation, n equals to 0 is false, is all that you need to write. Because with a conjunction, if the left-hand side of a conjunction is false, you don't bother to evaluate the right-hand side. So n equals to 0 is false because it has a value of 45, and then you get to post, you're all done.
So if the first one was true and the second one was false, would you write n equals 0 is true and then I is less?
Then you say n equals to 0 and blah 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 is false.
Oh, okay.
Because that kind of implies that the second one is the one that makes it false. Yep. Yep.
So is return info and all that stuff not going to be on this test?
I guess I can save that for the final exam.
That'd be wonderful.
So return info, will be saved for the final exam, and the parameters, since it's not in the practice test, I'll save that for the final exam as well. Any disappointment? No. It's like, oh man, I spent the whole week studying all that stuff. It's all going to waste.
Extremely, except I forgot all of this.
Exactly.
You should get,
Yep. Go ahead.
You should get one of the parameter homeworks maybe like 6 months ago.
Parameter homework. Well, that reminds me, I should give you guys a new homework assignment on return values, passing by reference, and passing by value. So let me just give one to you right now. After I save this one. Have I saved this? No. Okay. Let me export it and save it first.
And you could just make it do like 3 weeks from now.
Don't forget.
That'll give us time to do the test, forget all that stuff, and then try to start.
And you can do it all at the same time. Is
You know what day the final report? Is it Tuesday or Thursday?
Tuesday,
Oh,
1 week from today.
No, the final.
Oh, the final, okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
1 week from today.
It's like, wait a second. I thought we still had a break.
It's whatever the time the exam schedule is.
Yeah, I just think
telling us.
I think it's Thursday, the 16th.
I didn't know if it was Thursday or Tuesday.
I will just look it up.
I'm
I'll
pretty sure
just
it's
look it up
Thursday,
right now.
16th.
Final exam schedule. This is definitely a day class, Tuesday, Thursday. It starts at 2:30.
Tuesday on May 21st.
So this is our final exam time. It's on Thursday, May 16th from 10:15 to 12:15. 2 hours. All right, back to your new homework assignment.
Let's see. My other class before this had I was talking to Joe.
Oh. All right. So define sub. Let's see.
You just do like one like the last one where it never even starts and then just finishes.
Sorry?
You just do one like the last problem we just did where it just doesn't even start. It's just like 1, 2, 3.
That was a good one.
That's a good one, man.
See, there we go.
It was not
Whole class
intentional.
agreed.
Yeah, that was not intentional. I messed up the loop. I should have saying and when n does not equal to 0, stay in the loop. But instead I said when n equals to 0, so you just exit.
You probably
right
started
away.
grading him and you're probably like, what the heck?
Why is everyone getting this wrong?
Oh no, I was pleasantly surprised when I graded it because it's pretty much all correct. It's like easy to grade. When they're wrong, they're like flat out wrong. It cannot be like, oh okay, minor mistake here. No, there's no such thing as minor mistake when they're comparing to 0.
Unintentional trick question.
So here's your new homework. So I'll just go do a bit of questions. Okay, x gets x plus 1, return x minus 1. Okay, so here's one subroutine. So this is a rare case where I'm combining passing by reference with a return value. Well, nothing says that I cannot do it. I mean, they are completely independent mechanisms. Okay, so it's perfectly okay to have a pass by reference parameter, and yet at the same time it has a return value. So I'll define another one, which is called pre-decrement, passing by reference x. In this case, x gets x minus 1. Return x itself, but not x plus 1. Define sub. These terms are particularly really useful because by the time you move on to a C class, a post increment and a pre-decrement, those are actual operators. They're not subroutine calls, but they're actual operators in C and C++. But this is actually what they do. So that's why this is a it looks kind of not really that useful, but it really is useful for as a preparation for C and C++. Okay, define sub main, and we'll just go ahead and have one local variable. Okay, so local variable I, doesn't matter what it is, and I'll give I a particular value. Let's say I is initialized to 4. And this is what I'll do. I'm going to print invoke post inc I specifies x plus invoke pre-decrement I specifies x again, and define sub invoke main. All right, I think that's good. Well, it's a good test of the mechanisms. Okay, can you track the algorithm? Basically based on what we talked about in the class. It's a good combination of the things that we talked about. With passing by value. Passing by reference, local variables, returning a value, having 2 invocations on the same line. But those are all individual things. You just have to do it line by line and from left to right. So that's your new homework assignment. Yep, go ahead.
So when we're doing, I'm just trying to remember how to do when we have like print, invoke, posting, plus invoke, prename. You have a question mark on one, and then you just leave the other one. So it'd be like
Correct.
question mark
add
plus
one more thing to
invoke,
it.
predec, I plus X.
Right, because
Okay.
at any particular time, you can only invoke one subroutine at a time. So basically, when you invoke one subroutine, leave the rest of the line the same thing.
Okay.
So that when you remind yourself what else you have to do when you come back to the same line, then you say, oh, okay, now that I have resolved the first one with a number, I can move on to the next one. Okay? But this one does have an interesting side effect, because there's passing by reference. And so, as you evaluate, I have to make this very clear. Evaluate this from left to right. Okay, you have to do it from left to right, because if you evaluate it in a different order, you can potentially get a different result. So you have to do it from left to right. All right, so I'm gonna save this. Get to this folder. And just say post free ink decrement. Oh, turn on track changes. It won't let me save again until I make some silly changes. There you go. All right. So I'll post this, in Moodle. I just spent about 10 more minutes here and upload the notes for today onto the website. And I'll see you guys on Thursday. So when you work on this homework assignment, if you have questions, ask it on Thursday. When you have questions about the practice exam, ask it on Thursday too. Sorry? 1 week from today. So on the